So I think the main point of the video is if you haven't thought about a plan B, the time to do so was yesterday. And if you didn't do it yesterday, the second best time to do it is today. Now, I want to be clear. I think the probability of them implementing the typical type of capital controls that governments implement because they don't want money fleeing the country or they need those dollars for XYZ reason, I think that's very low. That's as close to a zero probability. I mean, that's right up there with them defaulting on treasuries by not paying them, an outright default, especially over the next 36 months. But it isn't to say that the probability is near zero that they freeze your bank account because you say something naughty or that you do something naughty. Or maybe we get to a certain point with AI that you even think it's like Minority Report, that you even think something that you shouldn't. And as a result, they have their purchasing power frozen. You see, to me, that's much, much more likely. And that is something I am very, very, very concerned about. Carnage always comes by surprise. First of all, title, capital controls are coming. The carnage always comes by surprise. Often on an otherwise ordinary Saturday morning, the government declares a surprise bank holiday, shuts all the banks. It imposes capital controls to stop citizens from taking their money out of the country. And this is just a perfect way to describe it. It's like cash sniffing dogs, which make drug sniffing dogs look friendly, show up at airports. At the point, the government is free to help itself to as much of the country's wealth as it wants. It's an all-you-can-steal buffet. And GM Bruno thinks that, and I know Doug echoes this, thinks that it's inevitable in the United States. So they talk about why governments impose capital controls. With capital controls, the thief is trying to block all exits so you can't reach safe ground. And I believe they're blocking the exits just to punish you. Regardless of the initial catalyst, capital controls help the government trap money. And this is where I'd slightly disagree. It's not trap money in the country, it's trap humans in the country. A government can usually convince people that moving money offshore or investing in foreign assets is only for rich tax evaders, unpatriotic. Of course, that's going to be the narrative they're trying to push along with the mainstream media. So here they list the types of capital controls that we could see in the United States. I wanted to focus on this one because this is one that I think is the highest probability. Another tactic is taxing money transfers out of the country. Now, they're not going to do it for everybody. They're just going to do it for people that deserve it. The people that aren't contributing to the greater good. In fact, they're talking badly about the government. How dare you do that? When the government is just this altruistic servant of society at large. And anyone that would throw stones at the power of the government or its ability to censor wrong think or wrong vote or wrong actions, anyone that would stand up against the benevolence of the government is someone that needs to be punished. Now, we might not put them in jail. Well, that's probably coming too. The very least thing that we can do is charge them. Well, it's just a fine, right? It's a fine. This is you see this narrative. I mean, you see how it can come to fruition very easily. All right. So the taxation of the money that you have, or just have to pay a fee or whatever, and especially if you want to take it outside of the country because you want to get out of the insanity, well, you might be able to leave, assuming they don't take your passport, but your money's staying here because it's the punishment. It's your penance that you need to pay. So they talk about capital controls in the past, and basically they're using the example of Roosevelt taking the gold for dollars and revaluing it, basically stealing purchasing power, which I guess is the same thing. And then they continue to prohibit the ownership of gold until 1974. I wanted to highlight this because as I was going through that question from the Rebel Capitalist Pro member, I was trying to think, what would I do? What would I do? And in essence, I've already done a lot of what I would do if I was concerned about this in the United States. So obviously, number one, you want to get assets or purchasing power outside of the purview or outside of the grasp of the Democrats / socialists. Or look, who knows? It might be the Republicans in 10 years. Just the bottom line, the central planners, authoritarians, those who want to implement tyranny on their subjects. This is how they look at the normal average Joe and Jane. It's these people. And sometimes they're Republicans, sometimes they're Democrats. Right now in U.S. history, I would argue they're Democrats. But again, in 5-10 years, who knows? What happens if you're too late? International Man goes over this. Capital controls are almost always a prelude to something worse. And this, I could not agree more. If they implement this, or maybe even when they implement this system of punishment, then what's to stop them from taking it 1, 2, 3, 4 steps further? The answer, not much. That's a very, very, very slippery slope. And they go, what can you do about it? Simple solution. Place some of your savings outside your home country by setting up a foreign bank account. Now, I would do this, but I'd also, what's interesting is I was in Ecuador when I retired, or after I retired. This would have been 2013, 14. It was just prior to me coming to Colombia. And they did the same thing. Well, they actually implemented capital controls where they started charging you like 5 or 10% just for taking your money out of the country. I'm like, no, that ain't happening. So what ended up, you go back to that time, and the result of this, or my decision-making process, was, no, that ain't happening, and I'm going to take my money out of the country in a way where they can't get their greedy paws on it. So I won't go into what I did. I don't want to incriminate myself in public on a YouTube video, but I have personal experience with this, and it ain't fun. And you definitely want to be prepared. At the end of the day, what's your downside? Let's just assume that all you do is set up a foreign bank account. Okay, great. What's your downside? There is none. You're prepared. It helps you sleep well at night. But what I would do is I would set up a foreign bank account, but I would also, I don't know that I'd want to have a lot of purchasing power there. I'd probably want to have the majority of my purchasing power in gold, really, and probably in Bitcoin as well. If I'm specifically setting it up around a plan B. Now, we're not talking about portfolio and all that stuff and making money and investing. We're talking about insurance policy. We're talking about plan B to make sure that you increase and maintain your freedom and liberty moving forward. That's what we're talking about, okay? So I would definitely want a lot of gold. I'd want it in a jurisdiction that was as quote unquote safe as possible. And then if I did bounce out of the country because I thought, let's say I was part of the trucker movement, or let's say that you are part of a future trucker movement or the equivalent of, you want to get out of Dodge before they take your passport, you do so, and then you've got your gold, but then you'd want to sell some of that gold. Obviously, you need to take that purchasing power, turn it into cash, because when you're location XYZ, as I demonstrated in Argentina, it's very rare to find a vendor that's going to take Bitcoin or gold. So you want a mechanism to be able to transfer that gold into purchasing power, the gold that you're not going to save, that you're using for your daily expenses. Or you'd want to do the same thing with Bitcoin. So that's why you have the bank account set up, because it makes that process much, much easier. So this was pretty much my answer to the person in Rebel Capitalist Pro. But I take that back, because the major component of my answer wasn't just buying gold, Bitcoin, having a foreign bank account, but is also thinking about foreign real estate. Because let's just assume for a moment, well, we don't have to assume. You guys know that I have property right here in Colombia, in Medellin, where I'm talking to you from right now. So if I ever decided just to leave the United States for good, there's a very, very low probability, even if they were able to somehow get the Colombian government to freeze my bank account here in Colombia or something like that, it would be almost impossible for them to do the same thing with my apartment that's throwing off that cash flow, that's allowing me to support myself and maintain or even increase the level of freedom I had. So I think the main point of the video is, if you haven't thought about a plan B, the time to do so was yesterday. And if you didn't do it yesterday, the second best time to do it is today. Now, whether you go to International Man, whatever you do, you just got to start thinking about this stuff. You can't live life like an ostrich with your head buried in the sand if you're someone that values freedom, liberty, and free market capitalism. If you're a rebel capitalist. Now, if you just want to go along with the herd and get slaughtered with the rest of the sheep, well, then this isn't for you. And just keep what you're doing. Keep on doing what you're doing with your 401k and having 100% of your net worth tied to the United States or whatever country you're in.